The Valtteri Dominion had never known defeat, and Admiral Catherine saw no reason why that would change today or any day that followed. He stood on the command bridge of the Eternal Victory, his flagship and the crown jewel of the greatest invasion fleet ever assembled in the history of his species. And he watched the stars bend around them as 2,000 warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of an unremarkable solar system. The system had a single yellow star, 8 planets of various sizes, and one small blue world that was home to a species called humans. Catherine had read every report about them, and he had found nothing impressive in those pages. The humans had only discovered faster-than-light travel within the last century, and their ships were slow and poorly armed compared to even the weakest vessels in the Dominion fleet. They had no unified government, no great military alliance, and no history of warfare beyond their own world. They were, by every measure that mattered, a primitive species that had barely crawled out of their own atmosphere. The conquest would be simple, and Catherine expected to return home within 3 standard rotations with another world added to the Dominion's collection. His second-in-command, a younger officer named Vethros, approached with a data tablet in his 4-fingered hands. "Admiral, we have completed our final approach calculations, and the fleet is in perfect formation." Catherine nodded without looking at him, his attention fixed on the viewport where the distant blue dot of Earth was barely visible among the stars. "How many worlds does the Dominion control now, Vethros?" 340 across 3 galactic arms, Admiral. "And how many species have successfully resisted our conquest?" "None, Admiral, as you well know." Catherine allowed himself a small smile, the closest thing to emotion he ever displayed in front of his crew. Then why should these humans be any different? Vethros hesitated for just a moment before answering. "There is no reason to believe they will be, Admiral. But I must note that our intelligence division has flagged some unusual patterns in their communications." "Unusual how?" "They do not seem afraid, Admiral. And some of our analysts believe they may not fully understand the size of our fleet or the nature of our intentions." Catherine waved a dismissive hand. "Ignorance is not a defense, and it will not save them from what is coming." He turned away from the viewport and walked to the central command console, where holographic displays showed the position of every ship in his fleet. 2,000 vessels stretched across millions of kilometers of space, each one armed with weapons that could reduce cities to ash and shields that could withstand nuclear fire. The humans had nothing that could challenge such power, and Catherine knew this with absolute certainty because his intelligence officers had spent years studying Earth from the shadows. They had cataloged every weapon, every ship, and every military installation the humans possessed. The analysis was clear and undeniable. Earth would fall within days, and the humans would join the long list of species that served the Dominion. As the fleet crossed the orbit of the outermost planet, a frozen world the humans called Neptune, something unexpected happened. The communication officers began receiving transmissions from Earth. And these transmissions were not what anyone had anticipated, Admiral. "We are receiving messages on all frequencies," one of the officers reported with confusion in his voice. "What kind of messages?" "They appear to be warnings, Admiral, but they are not threatening in nature." Catherine frowned and gestured for the messages to be played on the main speakers. A human voice filled the bridge, calm and measured and speaking in perfect Valtteri language, to the commanders of the approaching fleet. "This message is a courtesy and nothing more, and we ask that you listen carefully before you proceed any further into our system." The bridge fell silent as every officer stopped their work to listen. "We know who you are, and we know what you have done to 340 worlds before ours. And we do not judge you for this, because we understand the nature of conquest better than you might imagine." Catherine's eyes narrowed as he listened. "We are sending this message not as a threat, but as an act of mercy. And we ask you one simple thing. Turn back now and return to your space and tell your leaders that Earth is not a world they want to claim. A murmur spread through the bridge officers, and Catherine silenced them with a sharp look. We will not explain ourselves further because you would not believe us if we did. And we will not beg because that is not in our nature. But we are giving you this one chance to leave in peace, because what waits for you here is something your species has never encountered. The message paused, and when it continued, the voice had changed somehow, carrying a weight that made several officers shift uncomfortably in their seats. You see us as primitive and weak and easy to conquer, and we have allowed you to see us this way because it was simpler for everyone involved. But if you continue your approach, you will discover why we have worked so hard to appear harmless. Another pause. Turn back now, and you can tell your people that Earth was not worth the effort. And no one will question your decision because we will give you that gift. The message ended, and the bridge remained silent for a long moment. Then Catherine laughed. It was not a kind laugh or a nervous laugh, but a laugh of genuine amusement at what he considered the most pathetic attempt at intimidation he had ever witnessed. They think words will save them, he said to his officers, who quickly joined in his laughter. Though some of them did not laugh as loudly as others. Vethros, send a response to the humans and tell them that the Velthari Dominion does not negotiate with species that have not yet learned their place in the galaxy. Yes, Admiral, and increase speed to maximum, because I want to reach Earth before they have time to prepare any more amusing speeches. The fleet surged forward. 2,000 ships carrying 500,000 soldiers and enough firepower to crack a planet in half. And Admiral Catherine stood at the center of it all with absolute confidence in his victory. He did not notice that 3 of his communication officers had grown pale and quiet. He did not notice that the temperature on the bridge had dropped by 2 degrees, and he did not notice the way the stars seemed to flicker strangely as his fleet passed the orbit of Neptune and entered the inner solar system. The humans had given them a warning. The humans had offered them mercy, and the Velthari Dominion had laughed in their faces in the days that followed. No one would be laughing anymore. The first battles went exactly as Admiral Catherine had predicted, and this should have made him happy. But something felt wrong in a way he could not explain. Human orbital defense platforms fell silent one after another as Velthari weapons tore through their shields like claws through paper. Human warships, small and slow and laughably outgunned, were reduced to expanding clouds of debris within minutes of each engagement. Human military stations were boarded and captured with minimal resistance, and the soldiers who defended them fought bravely but died quickly. Everything was proceeding according to plan. Everything was perfect, and yet Catherine could not shake the feeling that something was watching him from the shadows of space. Admiral, we have secured the final orbital station above Mars, Vethros reported with pride in his voice. Casualties? 12 soldiers wounded and 2 killed, Admiral, which is far below our projections. Catherine nodded slowly and stared at the holographic display showing the red planet called Mars. The humans had built colonies there. Vast domed cities and underground complexes that house millions of people. And these colonies would serve as the staging point for the final assault on Earth. Begin landing operations immediately. And I want every colony secured before the next cycle. Yes, Admiral. The troop transports descended through the thin Martian atmosphere, and Catherine watched them on his display with growing unease. The humans were not fighting back. They had resisted at the orbital stations, but only barely, and now the colonies below were silent. No transmissions, no distress calls, no signs of military movement. It was as if the entire planet had simply given up. or as if the entire planet was waiting. The first reports from the ground teams came within the hour. And they were not what anyone expected, Admiral. Commander Yethran is requesting to speak with you directly. Catherine accepted the communication, and the face of his ground force commander appeared on the screen. Yethran was a veteran of 50 planetary conquests, a soldier who had seen every horror that war could offer and had never flinched. But the look in his eyes now was something Catherine had never seen before. Report. Commander. Admiral, the colonies are empty. Empty? There are no humans here, Admiral. Not in the first colony, and not in any of the others we have secured so far. And we have found no bodies, and no signs of evacuation. Catherine leaned forward in his chair. That is impossible. Commander, because our sensors detected millions of life signs just hours ago. I know. Admiral, and I cannot explain it, but that is not the strangest thing. What else have you found? Yethran's image flickered slightly, and when he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. There are messages carved into the walls, Admiral. In every building, and every corridor, and every room we have entered. What kind of messages? They are written in our language, Admiral, in perfect Velthari script, and they all say the same thing. What do they say? Yethran swallowed hard before answering. They say, you should have listened. The communication ended abruptly, and Catherine sat in silence for a long moment while his bridge crew exchanged nervous glances. Vethros. Get Commander Yethran back on the line. I am trying, Admiral, but his signal has gone dark. Then contact any of the ground teams. I am trying. Admiral. The seconds stretched into minutes, and the minutes felt like hours. And finally, a communication came through from Mars. It was not Commander Yethran. It was a young soldier whose name Catherine did not know. And the soldier was running through empty corridors with his weapon drawn and his breathing ragged. This is Private Catherine to any ship in orbit. Please respond. This is Admiral Catherine, Private. Report your situation immediately. Admiral. They are gone, sir. Commander Yethran and his entire squad. They were standing right next to me, and then they were just gone. Gone where? I do not know, sir. One moment they were there, and the next moment they were not. And there was no sound and no light and no warning of any kind. The soldier's voice cracked with fear. Admiral, something is wrong with this place. The walls are too quiet, and the air smells like copper, and I keep seeing shadows moving where there should not be any shadows. Private. Calm yourself and make your way to the extraction point. I am trying, sir, but the corridors keep changing. And I know that sounds impossible, but I swear to you that the corridors keep changing. And I passed the same message on the wall 5 times, even though I've been walking in a straight line. The transmission dissolved into static. Private Catherine. Respond. Silence. Private Catherine. Respond immediately. More silence. And then something that was not silence. Something that might have been breathing, or might have been wind, or might have been something else entirely. Then the static cleared, and a voice came through the speakers. It was a human voice. Soft and calm and almost friendly. Your soldiers are safe, Admiral, or at least they are not in pain. Which is the closest thing to safe that we can offer them now. Catherine's blood ran cold. Who is this? That is not important, Admiral. What is important is that you understand what is happening here. What have you done with my soldiers? We have done nothing, Admiral. We have simply stopped pretending. And your soldiers have seen what we really are. And that knowledge has a cost that their minds were not prepared to pay. The voice paused. You were warned. Admiral, you were given every chance to leave. And you chose to ignore that warning. And now your soldiers are learning why we tried so hard to keep you away. This is some kind of trick. Some kind of weapon or technology that we have not encountered before. No. Admiral, this is not a trick. This is the truth. And the truth is that humans are not what we appear to be. the communication cut off, and the bridge fell into a terrible silence. Catherine stood from his chair and looked at his officers, searching for answers in their faces and finding only fear. "Get our soldiers off that planet immediately, all of them, and prepare the fleet for orbital bombardment. Admiral, there are still thousands of our soldiers on the surface. Then get them to the extraction points now." The evacuation began within the hour, but it did not go well. Of the 50,000 soldiers who had landed on Mars, only 30,000 made it back to the transports. The others had simply vanished, taken by something that no one could see, and no one could fight, and no one could understand. And the soldiers who did return were not the same as the soldiers who had landed. They were quiet and pale, and they refused to speak about what they had seen in those empty corridors. Some of them wept without making any sound. Some of them stared at nothing with eyes that had forgotten how to focus, and some of them whispered the same words over and over again in voices that did not sound like their own. "You should have listened. You should have listened. You should have listened." Admiral Catherine stood on his bridge and watched the transports return. And for the first time in his long career, he felt something he had never felt before. He felt afraid. Admiral Catherine demanded answers, and for 3 cycles, his intelligence officers worked without rest to find them. They reviewed every piece of data they had gathered about humanity over the years of surveillance. They analyzed every transmission, every cultural artifact, every historical record they had collected, and finally, Chief Intelligence Officer Methril came to the bridge with a look on his face that suggested he had found something terrible. "Admiral, I believe we have made a critical error in our assessment of the humans." "Explain." Methril placed his data tablet on the central console and activated a holographic display showing human text alongside Valkyrie translations. "When we first studied human languages, we encountered a word that appeared frequently in their military and cultural texts, and we translated this word as warrior because that seemed to be the closest equivalent in our language. And this translation was wrong? Not wrong exactly, Admiral, but incomplete in ways that we did not understand until now." Methril highlighted a passage of human text and expanded it so everyone on the bridge could see. The human word we translated as warrior has a deeper meaning that our linguists missed. And when examined in proper context, it actually means something closer to one who has learned to cage the beast within. Catherine frowned at the display. "I do not understand the significance of this distinction. Neither did we at first, Admiral, so we went back and re-examined human history with this new understanding. And what we found has changed everything we thought we knew about this species." Methril changed the display to show a timeline of human civilization. "We originally believed that human history was a record of a primitive species slowly ascending from barbarism towards civilization. That they were following the same path of development that every other species we have encountered has followed. That is the natural progression of intelligent life." "Yes, Admiral, but the humans have not followed that progression." Methril zoomed in on various points in the timeline, each one marked with symbols that indicated major conflicts. "Human history is not a record of ascending civilization, Admiral. It is a record of a species that is perpetually at war with something inside itself." "What do you mean?" "Look at their wars, Admiral. Look at the scale and the brutality and the frequency of them. And then look at what they built after each one." The display showed images of human cities and institutions and systems of government. Every major advancement in human civilization was built specifically to contain something. "Admiral, their laws and their religions and their governments and their social structures, all of it was designed not to help them grow, but to keep something locked away." Catherine studied the images with growing unease. "You are saying that humans built their entire civilization as a cage?" "Yes, Admiral, and the cage was not built to keep enemies out. It was built to keep something in. A heavy silence fell over the bridge. For thousands of years, the humans have worked to suppress something within their own nature, something ancient and terrible that exists in every single one of them. And they have been so successful at this suppression that even they have forgotten what they truly are. Methril paused and looked directly at the Admiral. But they have not forgotten completely, Admiral, because the knowledge is still there in their oldest stories and their darkest myths. And it is still there in the word they use for those among them who have learned to control what lives inside, the warriors. Yes, Admiral, the ones who have learned to cage the beast, the ones who know what they are capable of and have chosen to keep it hidden. Catherine walked to the viewport and stared out at the distant blue dot of Earth. Are you telling me that our invasion has somehow released this thing that they have been suppressing? No, Admiral. I am telling you something worse than that. Methril joined him at the viewport. Our invasion has not released anything. Admiral, our invasion has given them permission to stop pretending. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. The humans knew we were coming long before we arrived, Admiral, and they chose not to fight us with their ships and their weapons because those things were never their true strength. And what is their true strength? We do not know, Admiral, because whatever it is, they have spent their entire history hiding it from the universe and from themselves. A communication alert sounded, and Vethras approached with obvious reluctance. Admiral, we have a situation in the medical bay. What kind of situation? It is the soldiers who returned from Mars, Admiral. The ones who survived. They are all saying the same thing now, speaking in unison as if they are sharing one voice. Catherine felt his stomach tighten. What are they saying? They are saying that they understand now, Admiral. They are saying that they have seen what the humans really are. And they are saying that we should not have come here. Take me to them. The Admiral walked through the corridors of his flagship with Methril and Vethras beside him. And with every step he felt the weight of something vast and unknowable pressing down on him. When they reached the medical bay, they found the surviving soldiers sitting in perfect rows on the floor, their eyes open but unfocused, their mouths moving in perfect synchronization. They have been like this for hours. The chief medical officer reported with fear in her voice. Catherine stepped closer to the soldiers and listened to what they were saying. You do not understand what you have awakened. Admiral, you do not understand that the humans are not a young species, but an old one. Older than your records show, older than they themselves remember. The soldiers' voices blended into one, a chorus of whispers that seemed to come from somewhere far away. They came to this world long ago, and they found something here that terrified them. Something inside themselves, and they built everything you see, all of their civilization and culture and law, to keep that something sleeping. Catherine backed away from the soldiers, but it is not sleeping anymore, Admiral, because you have given them a reason to wake it up. You have given them an enemy that their cages cannot contain. And now they are remembering what they used to be before they learned to pretend to be human. The soldiers fell silent all at once, and then they smiled, all of them together, and the smile was not a human expression, and it was not a Valkyrie expression, and it was not the expression of any species that Catherine had ever encountered. Admiral, what do we do? Vethros asked in a voice barely above a whisper. Catherine did not answer because he did not know. He had conquered 340 worlds and had never once questioned his ability to claim any territory he desired. But now, standing in the medical bay of his own flagship, surrounded by his own soldiers who no longer seemed to be his own soldiers at all, Admiral Catherine understood that he had finally found something that could not be conquered. And that something had only just begun to show him what it could do. The fleet began to die, and there was nothing Admiral Catherine could do to stop it. It started with the ships on the outer edges of the formation, vessels that were too far from the flagship to receive direct support, one by one. Their communication signals went dark at first. The Admiral assumed it was equipment failure, a malfunction caused by some unknown human weapon or interference field. He sent repair teams and investigation crews. And those teams and crews vanished as completely as the ships they were sent to examine. Then the reports began coming from the ships that were still operational. And those reports described things that should not have been possible, Admiral. This is Captain Vethrol of the Crimson Dawn. And I need to report that we have intruders on board. Describe these intruders. They are humans. Admiral, but they are not like any humans we have seen before. Explain. They move through walls. Admiral, they step through solid metal as if it were water. And our weapons pass through them without leaving any mark. That is impossible. I know, Admiral. And yet I am watching it happen right now. The transmission dissolved into screaming, Captain Vethrol. Respond. Silence. Captain Vethrol, respond immediately. More silence. And then a sound that might have been laughter, but was too high and too wrong to be laughter from any throat that Catherine recognized. The next report came from the Vengeance of Stars, a battleship commanded by one of the most experienced officers in the fleet, Admiral. We have found 3 of our crew members standing in the vacuum outside our hull. They went outside without suits? No, Admiral. They did not go outside. They were found standing on the exterior of the ship with no suits and no breathing equipment. And they are still alive. That is not possible. They are waving at us. Admiral, they are smiling and waving as if nothing is wrong. And when we sent a shuttle to retrieve them, they simply walked away across the surface of our ship and disappeared. Another ship, the Eternal Silence, reported that their psychics had all collapsed at the same moment. The Valkyrie employed psychics for communication and intelligence gathering. Individuals who could sense thoughts and emotions across vast distances. And every psychic in the fleet had been screaming for hours now. They say they can hear singing. Admiral, old songs in a language that existed before language. And they say the songs are getting louder. The psychic who reported this was restrained in a medical bed, with her eyes bandaged because she had tried to claw them out. What else do they say? They say the humans are not alone, Admiral. They say there is something else here, something that was sleeping for a very long time. And it is waking up now because we gave it a reason to wake up. Catherine ordered the fleet to pull back, to retreat to Mars orbit and regroup. But the fleet could not retreat because ships kept disappearing and the remaining vessels could not maintain formation. Then came the report from Mars itself. From the soldiers who had been left behind during the evacuation, Admiral. We have found the missing soldiers. Where? They are arranged in patterns on the surface, Admiral. Geometric shapes that cover kilometers of ground, and they are all alive. Bring them back immediately. We cannot, Admiral. Why not? Because they are awake, but they are not there anymore, Admiral. Their bodies are breathing and their hearts are beating, but when we look into their eyes, there is nothing looking back. And when we speak to them, they do not respond. What do you mean there is nothing looking back? I mean their minds are gone, Admiral. Whatever made them who they were has been removed. And what remains is just flesh and bone and nothing else. The fleet lost 200 ships. In the next cycle alone, some exploded without warning, some simply vanished from sensors as if they had never existed. Some sent distress signals that cut off midward, and some transmitted hours of footage showing their crews walking calmly and peacefully toward the airlocks, opening them, and stepping into the void with smiles on their faces. Then came the transmission from Earth. The face that appeared on the screen was that of a human child. A young girl with dark hair and pale skin and eyes that were too old for her face. Hello, Admiral Catherine. Who are you? I am nobody important, Admiral. I am just the one they chose to deliver this message, because I still remember how to speak in ways that your kind can understand. What message? We have decided to let you leave. Admiral, Catherine felt his heart stop. "You may take 17 of your ships and return to your space. And we will not pursue you, and we will not harm any vessel that carries the survivors." "Why 17? "Because 17 is enough to carry a warning, Admiral, and that is all you are now. A warning to whoever sent you here. And the rest of my fleet?" "The rest of your fleet will serve a different purpose, Admiral." The child smiled. And the smile was the same wrong smile that the soldiers in the medical bay had worn. The smile that belonged to something ancient and hungry and patient. Your ships and your soldiers will become a message. Admiral, a message written in metal and flesh and silence. A message that will tell the universe what happens to those who come to Earth uninvited. You cannot do this. We already have. Admiral, we have been doing it since the moment you crossed Neptune's orbit. And you did not notice because you were too busy believing that you were the conquerors. The child leaned closer to the screen. We tried to warn you. Admiral, we tried to give you a chance to leave. And you laughed at us, so now you will learn what we are. And you will carry that knowledge back to your people. And they will know never to return. What are you? We are humans, Admiral. We are exactly what we have always claimed to be. A young and primitive species that has barely learned to travel between the stars. The child's eyes flickered with something that was not light, but we are also something else. Admiral, something older, something that we have spent our entire history trying to forget. And you have reminded us of what we can do when we stop pretending. The transmission ended. Catherine stood on his bridge and watched his fleet die around him. Ship after ship going dark, crew after crew vanishing into silence. And he understood at last that he had never been the conqueror here. He had been the prey, and the humans had simply been waiting for him to realize it. 17 ships limped back to Valtteri space, their hulls scorched and scarred by damage that no weapon had caused. Their systems flickering with malfunctions that no engineer could explain. Admiral Catherine was not among the survivors. His flagship, the Eternal Victory, had been found drifting near Jupiter's orbit with every light extinguished and every system dead. When recovery teams boarded the vessel, they found the ship completely empty. No bodies, no blood, no signs of struggle. Just empty corridors and silent rooms, and a single message written on the bridge viewport in a language that the Valtteri had never seen before, but somehow understood perfectly. The cage is not for us. The 17 ships that made it home carried no living crew. Every single soldier, every officer, every technician and engineer and cook had vanished somewhere during the journey back. The ships arrived on autopilot. Their navigation systems programmed with coordinates that led them directly to the Valtteri homeworld. And when the rescue teams boarded these vessels, they found something that would haunt the Valtteri for generations to come. The ship logs were intact. Every moment of the return journey had been recorded in perfect detail, and what those logs showed was impossible to explain and impossible to forget. The recording showed crew members going about their duties normally for the first several days of the journey. They ate and slept and performed their work and spoke to each other in voices that sounded almost normal, but then, one by one, they began to change. It started with the eyes. The crew members would stop what they were doing and stare at nothing, their eyes fixed on points in space that the cameras could not capture. And when they turned back to their tasks, something was different about the way they moved. They became too smooth, too graceful, as if their bodies had forgotten the small imperfections that made movement look natural. Then they started speaking differently, not in a foreign language, but in their own language spoken with rhythms and patterns that were subtly wrong, as if someone was wearing their voices like borrowed clothing, and they smiled. They smiled constantly. All of them. The same smile that the soldiers on Mars had worn. The same smile that the child on the transmission had shown. A smile that belonged to something that was not Valtteri and not human. and not anything that had a name. The final logs on each ship showed the same scene: the crew members gathering in the corridors and walking together toward the airlocks, moving in perfect unison as if they were following music that only they could hear. They opened the airlocks calmly. They stepped into the vacuum without hesitation, and the entire time, the automated systems recorded their vital signs as normal, their brain activity as peaceful, their emotional state as content. They were not afraid. They were not forced. They walked into the void because they wanted to, because something had shown them something that made the void seem welcoming. The final log entry on each ship was identical: a voice, speaking in Velthory, but with a cadence that was unmistakably human, recorded the same words on all 17 vessels: tell the others that Earth is not a world to conquer. It is a cage, and we are not the prisoners. The Velthory High Council convened an emergency session when the ships arrived. They reviewed the logs. They analyzed the messages. They consulted their greatest scientists and their wisest advisors, and in the end, they made a decision that would define their civilization's relationship with humanity for centuries to come. They marked the Sol system with their highest classification. Do not approach. They erased all records of the invasion from public archives. They forbade any Velthory vessel from traveling within 10 light years of human space. And they watched from deep space observation posts, from hidden satellites, from probes disguised as asteroids. They watched the humans and waited for signs that the terror they had witnessed would spread beyond that small blue world. But the terror did not spread. Instead, the humans did something that terrified the Velthory even more than the events of the invasion. They acted normal in the decades that followed. Humanity expanded peacefully into the stars. They built colonies and space stations and trade outposts. They made contact with other species and established diplomatic relations. They joined interstellar councils and participated in galactic commerce. They were friendly and helpful and curious about the universe around them. They laughed at jokes and formed friendships and worked to solve problems that affected multiple species. They were, by every outward measure, exactly what they had claimed to be before the invasion: a young and optimistic species taking its first steps into a larger community. The Velthory watched all of this with growing horror because they remembered what they had seen. They remembered the empty colonies on Mars and the messages carved into the walls. They remembered the ships going dark and the soldiers vanishing without a trace. They remembered the crew members walking into the void with smiles on their faces. They remembered the voice of that child saying, "Earth is a cage, and we are not the prisoners." And they understood what that meant. The humans had built their civilization to contain something, to keep something locked away and sleeping and forgotten. And when the Velthory had invaded, the humans had let that something wake up, just for a little while, just long enough to deal with the threat. Then they had put it back to sleep. They had rebuilt the cage they had returned to, pretending that they were just a young and harmless species with no memory of what they could become. The Velthory watched the humans build alliances and foster cooperation and work toward peace. And they understood that this was the most terrifying thing of all, because the cage was not a prison. The cage was a choice. The humans knew what they were. They knew what lived inside them, and every single day, they chose to keep it locked away, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Because they had looked at what they could become and decided to be something else instead. The Velthory had conquered 340 worlds, and they had never encountered anything like this. They had never met a species that was capable of such terrible power and had chosen to suppress it. They had never met a species that had built its entire civilization as an act of self-control, and they prayed to whatever gods might listen, that the humans would never decide to stop pretending again. Centuries passed, the humans spread across the galaxy. They made friends with species who had never heard of the Velthri invasion. They helped build interstellar institutions and resolve conflicts between distant worlds, and through it all, they smiled and laughed and acted as if they were exactly what they appeared to be. The Velthri never spoke of what they knew. They never warned the other species. They never explained why they refused to enter human space or why they grew quiet whenever humans were mentioned, because some truths were too dangerous to share, and some cages, they understood now, were meant to look welcoming from the outside. On the anniversary of the invasion, every year without fail, a single transmission arrived at the Velthri homeworld from somewhere in human space. It contained no words. It contained no images. It contained only a sound, the sound of a child humming a melody that was older than language, a tune that made the listeners feel, just for a moment, what the crew members must have felt when they walked smiling into the void. The Velthri never responded to these transmissions. They never acknowledged receiving them. They simply listened and remembered, and were grateful that the cage still held. And somewhere on Earth, something ancient smiled in its sleep, content to dream for a little while longer, knowing that it would be remembered, even if it was never spoken of again. The conquest had seemed inevitable. Only 17 ships returned. The crews did not, and the universe learned, once again, that some worlds are not meant to be taken. Some species are not meant to be conquered. And some cages are built not to keep something in, but to give the rest of the universe a chance to survive.